Hello again. So this might be a short one. So I just did another, built another rocket and launched it, and it just barely made it into a polar orbit. You can see the first stage of the craft going away there. Uh, so we're not, or rather, that's the I think that's the able stage. So then we had to use a bit of our RCS here to just place the last orbit. So anyway, we've got our package in orbit. You can see from the impulse here, our RCS ISP. Same thing applies. We've still got we've got 100, 150 meters per second delta V, something like that. But I just wanted to try this orbit out as well for various reasons. So you've seen me put this payload into orbit, and a few other similarly masked payloads, and you end up with like 200 or 300 extra. With specifically how I'm doing it, I'm ending up with 200 or 300 extra meters per second of delta V. I don't need it to complete, whereas this just barely got into orbit, and then I needed a little RCS to get it above 150. And so when you don't go straight east from your launch, you don't gain from the orbit of the Earth, because the Earth spins in that direction, and so you get to save a couple hundred meters per second. And so by trying to launch into a polar orbit like this, which is a lot of spy satellites and things, camera satellites, we'll use an orbit like this because you get to pass over a lot of territory. Because when the angle of my orbital arc was just a little bit, so you can see here, let's say we're passing just over whatever the smallest connection between North and South America is. So once the Earth, once we come around 90 minutes from now, there will be a lot different territory that's directly underneath us. Let me just lock the batteries on this. I don't think this will actually work in 1.1 anymore. Nathan Keller or somebody else fixed that bug. But I can lock this battery, and so this avionics unit isn't going to eat all my power while I go around. So then I can unlock that battery. So it's a handy cheaty trick. I probably should have put some more science instruments on this, because I'm passing over places I've never passed over before, like the poles. So I probably should have put up some science instruments on this craft as well. But I'll transmit what little science I get from telemetry and such. As you can see here, let me click on the Earth, double click the Earth, and it'll focus there. So the Earth is rotating underneath my path, and as we come around for our first orbit, you can see, here we go. So we're not even close to over where we were before. You can't really tell where we are over now because of the clouds and everything, but it looks like actually, I don't know, California? Yeah, we're over Mexico right now. We can't quite see California in the distance, I don't think. No, we're just kind of over Mexico, and that might be the California Peninsula, or the, what's it called, the Mexican Peninsula itself of California. But anyway, so the Earth has rotated a lot under us, and so by being in an orbit that's like this rather than around the equator, a lot of territory is going to pass underneath us. Now this does limit kind of specifically how we can point and where we can point to, because we're in such a low orbit, and I think in practice they wanted spy satellites to be in a bit higher of an orbit than this. Also, there's good reasons to have an orbit like Soviet Millennia orbits, where your orbital period, rather than being this kind of standard 90 minutes or so, or in this case, 75 minutes? I don't know. Or no, that's a completely unrelated number. Yeah, about 90 minutes or so in this low orbit. If you have a higher orbit, or even just say your periapsis can be low, but your apoapsis is higher, and then if you have an orbital period of, say, 12 or 24 hours, then you'll be passing over a very specific region that if you want to take a lot of pictures of there, rather than passing over sort of random spots when you're in a lower orbit like this. We're going to pass over different spots. And so right now it's nighttime over the Soviet Union, but if we left this probe up here for a few days or weeks or something, obviously the sun's going to move around. We're going to get, the sun's going to move, the planet's going to rotate here, and so eventually we're going to be over the place we wanted to take pictures of. Whoa! So really the reason I wanted to do this video is because now I can show a successful, I can attempt a successful re-entry. Let's see, how good am I at... So if I were to, say, try to re-enter here, let's say I throw down a maneuver node with about 150 meters per second of delta V. So about where are we going to land? So, okay. So if I had done it, let's say, a little earlier, we would be landing kind of nearish California. In practice, some of the early spy satellites would come down, they would send down their, well, they wouldn't send down the whole satellite, they'd send down the film bucket, and they would send it down near Hawaii. So there we go. I think that's Hawaii. So if I wait one more orbit, I think we'll be dropping the bucket relatively near Hawaii. Let's see, let's pop another orbit into the future and then wait until it comes around. Obviously I'm not being very exact with it, but where is that satellite now? Coming around the back somewhere? Oh, there we go. It's around the South Pole. So you cover a lot more ground. If you're a satellite that's just around the equator, really all you're going to do is see line of sight of the equator all the time. Okay, so there we go. So now where is Hawaii? Oh, so many clouds. Well, it's somewhere. Oh, there we go. There it is. So if I drop down just a little earlier than I was planning, I should be kind of, I might see Hawaii on the way down even. Wait, yeah, I probably only have about 140 some delta V left, so probably could have even dropped earlier. And a film, there we go. So I might even see Hawaii. So I'm just going to start, I'm just going to point retrograde now. So I set up these, I set them up down just because that's going to be easier. Like kind of for the design, I thought it looked kind of, oh right, I need to unlock the battery. Electric charge shows it off, there we go. And I want to be pointed backwards. I kind of like the way it looks when they're pointed forwards, the little ports, but in practice the way this is, okay, I actually can't see there, so I don't know which direction I'm traveling in. So yeah, I'll have to follow that node. So but here I can just throttle up, and because I have no real engines, it goes like that. Rather than me having to hit, let's say I throttle that down, I'd have to hold H to do that, or N to do the inverse. It's just easier if you point the ports down. You could also, like, let's say, mount your control system upside down. There's all kinds of clever things you could do, but really I just like to be able to throttle up. That's my preference. And we're getting, this is our very first craft in orbit that we're going to try to return, so it's, it's a pretty substantial accomplishment in realism overhaul and RP-0. Even if it may not seem like it, this kind of kludged together, ugly, crap-looking craft, it's definitely a thing. It's definitely a difficult thing to do. And there were actually a number of various bugs in some of these parts and things that made it, nearly impossible before. Like the collider, some kind of modeled element of either like this package or of the heat shield or of procedural tanks was kind of broken. So when you tried to re-enter, it would overheat because the heating model would see a part it shouldn't have seen. We've worked on a lot of bugs. There's just a lot of unexpected things that pop up when you're modifying every part in every possible way. But thankfully now it's kind of not the most difficult and crazy thing to do this. So we can see we're bringing down the orbit. Like a film bucket or like something like this doesn't contain human lives will be able to handle a lot more G-forces on re-entry. And also, and this is a pretty good amount of G-force for RCS. It may not seem like it, like I just think of this as a percentage of G, so this is just under 3% G. That's not too bad. That's actually 50%, like it's either the same or about 50% more than the actual Gemini main engine had, which is technology we'll be working with soon. Because I'm using the FASA pack, all of my human-rated craft, my Mercury and my Gemini and whatnot will be the models right from that because they look great, they're configured, they don't look perfect. Some of them need replacement like Sob Story, or Sob, is that right? Sorry, my brain's a little tired. I think his name is Sob Story. It's a hilarious name, S-A-A-B. He's remodeling some of the Titan engines because they're some of the lower quality models. Like, Frizzank made these FASA models like years ago, and they're great. They're very functional. They work really well when we don't have a lot of memory. Some of them could do, being a little higher quality, particularly because they get used a lot, like the Titan engines. But anyway, yeah. So the FASA hardware looks really good. And in the future, it will look even better when some of it gets remodeled. So I'm just going to remove this maneuver node so you can see. So when this comes down to 0, so this is our AP, so with this really low thrust, you can see now, the blue line of our orbit is no longer in the air, so it's getting pulled back further and further. It's kind of a fine line. There's for re-entry. Like, you don't want to, like, let's say I could slow down 100 or 200, whatever, meters per second from where I am now. I may not want to, because the lower this number is, the more sharp of an angle you re-enter with, the more g-forces you face on the way down, unless your craft is designed in a certain way that I'll go over when we have the Gemini and the Apollo hardware, where it's able to produce lift. But this will be a ballistic entry, more or less, just like Mercury would also face. That looks pretty nice. The Earth starting to light up in front of us. Totally didn't time it that way, but I mean, the kind of the day, the sunlight darkness cycle and things are going to look a lot different when you're, again, orbiting this really weird way. I should also double check if there is a polar orbit contract, because that is totally a contract that people should get to complete in RP-0, because getting something into a polar orbit is kind of a whole, it's a bit more difficult than getting into a regular orbit. I feel like there should be kind of these little missions that kind of guide people along in these new accomplishments that are more difficult, kind of useful, important bullet points on the road towards these more difficult missions, like the film return we'll be doing later. And film return itself isn't actually a requested mission. Like, it's not a specific contract you get. It's just a new type of science. Is how we have it. That might be Hawaii. It's kind of hard to... No, that's totally not Hawaii. But it's an island, so maybe I'll see an island on the way down. But I think that's probably sufficient. I really like how the sky kind of brightens up gradually from orbit. Looks very nice. All right, so I think that's all we really need to do. And so I did have some excess nitrous oxide, which is nice. Didn't need to use all of it for deorbiting. So one of the more difficult things to do, I don't have a way to display it really quickly, but you want to kind of pay attention to your center of mass on a craft like this. Like right now, I kind of feel like it's too tall stacked, so I definitely made sure I did a test so I could make sure that it wouldn't wobble, because if the center of mass is too high, like, you need to keep the heat shield down while you're re-entering the atmosphere. And if the center of mass is too high, it's going to wobble, or it might try to reverse itself. And so you need to pay attention to the aerodynamics and the center of mass of your craft. That might be something, or maybe it's not. It's hard to tell. The clouds are nice, but they also obscure the land and the islands. Yeah, we're coming down. We're going to hit the leave space pretty soon. Sorry, I don't know if for when I popped that up, I hadn't really seen that space center option there in quite a while, and it kind of looked like a picture of Dick Butt. If you pay attention to the Reddits, probably a sign that my eyes are starting to go. Okay, so let's point backwards. So there's a bit of a stabilizing influence of, so right now these g-forces will gradually increase as the atmosphere catches us more and more, and that's another value of having that dynamic pressure labeled. So if your center of mass is low enough, kind of relative to the shape and everything of your craft, there will it'll start to stabilize where it will kind of pull itself back to retrograde. So it'll kind of like gradually wobble around that, but when g-forces are so low, it might not be enough. Let's see, so one thing I do want to pull up, let's get a little bit of FAR information just because it's interesting. Ballistic coefficient is a useful and neat number. There's a ton of numbers here, but I don't build airplanes, so to be honest, I don't know what ratios, what you want to be positive or negative, but I figured I'd pull it up. You used to have a much larger heat shield to use this avionics unit than you can get away with now, which is nice. See, it's not self-correcting directly backwards. We'll really start to have deceleration when we hit about 80 kilometers or so, and then it's kind of peaks around 60 or 70 kilometers of altitude. And when you're doing these early missions like this, where you're doing your first re-entries, it's good to keep an eye on, kind of, if you want to note down your initial numbers like this from your re-entry, and then keep track of your peak G-forces. Actually, there's another. Sorry, some people might just like to watch everything they're seeing, the Earth, the craft, etc. But I like the numbers, so I'll close this so I don't just fill the screen with numbers. But I do want to try to pull something else up. So I use the dev version of MechJeb because Sarbine keeps adding awesome features. So let's see, mark, reset. So I want to keep an eye on our acceleration and let's see, orbital speed or altitude. Some of these are probably going to be interesting. Whoa, no, I need to correct back to pointing again. Let's see, set this to surface velocity negative. So yeah, now with a lot of these contracts I'm completing like this, and the first flybys of the moon, I'm getting a bit of cash, which is nice. So if I had a bit of extra, like if I had actually set the payout to be 10 or 20% higher than I have set it, which I totally how I should have set it, I'd have enough money to set up a second line of rockets, or I would be able to. There we go. We're starting to see some numbers, although those will it'll be a little while till they actually start showing something interesting. It's kind of a cool graphical display that. Let's see, that MechJeb has. There we go. So the defaults are, I see, those were meters per pixel. Indeed, I certainly do have to set it to kilometers per pixel for it to be meaningful in this situation. From it, it's showing that we're losing altitude, and also acceleration is important. I could show Q, but they're because it's a ballistic entry. I won't kind of go into all the detailed reasons why, but our acceleration and our dynamic pressure are going to go. They're going to be pretty much the same function, and so they would grow and shrink the same way, just with a slightly different maximum amplitude. But this is a particularly interesting graph to keep an eye on so I'm just going to mark and reset since it's not really interesting yet, but it's going to start being. It's particularly interesting to watch, and I'll pop it up when we do a Gemini or an Apollo reentry, because you have a bit of control over those things. Because it's not just a straight ballistic reentry, you're actually generating some lift. It's definitely a much more interesting graph to watch. There we go. So we're starting to get some. So I believe when astronauts return, or at least American astronauts, and the benchmark they use for determining when they've started reentry is when they exceed 0.05 Gs, or 5% of G, because that's roughly when you definitely feel it. Looks like that might be an island. And so now we're well above that. So the craft should start having the ability to stabilize itself to retrograde. But thankfully we still, that's another part of the reason why we want to have control at this point, and we want to have nitrous oxide. With some later technology, there will be a smaller avionics package. I just haven't reached that level of technology. Like let's say, for example, a first lunar lander, I need, it's going to be a really small, like an unmanned lunar lander is going to be a very small craft, and so I need a power-efficient, light avionics package. And I haven't unlocked that yet. But you could also use that for something like this, is what I'm saying. There we go. So we're starting to get acceleration. We're dropping through the atmosphere. And we haven't started losing velocity yet, really. Not much. Okay, so I'm going to zoom out just a little bit more. That's what that will do. Basically shrink, make it 1 pixel represent a larger distance. So it's counting downrange distance, which I might actually be able to change by clicking that. But since the data's starting to get interesting, I'm not going to do that. And if I pop up, nope, not arrow forces, there we go. So you can see that the heat shield is starting to warm up, and we're starting to lose ablator. Yeah, I'll lock it like that. So there's going to be kind of jaggies in this because I'm accelerating and not accelerating time. Okay, so it's going to change scale when acceleration peaks, and we're really starting to lose velocity now. Like we've already dropped a kilometer per second or so of velocity. So I think it's stable enough now. Like my craft, like I said, because it's tall, it's the more taller you make it, the less stable it will be. But because we're already at such a high g-force, it's stable enough now. So it's wobbling a little bit. You can see that by how this pitch oscillates. But it's good enough. And so acceleration just keeps increasing. So yes, sir, I mentioned earlier, I might not have finished the idea. You keep it, it's a good idea to take a look at what you set your entry parameters at, your orbital max and min, and then also pay attention to how that relates to your peak g-force is what you hit, because your crew can't survive as much as these test craft can. And so you want to keep that down somewhat. And keep it below 10 or 7 or 8. Like it would be preferable that it didn't hit this high, but that's not too bad. Like if I had not done the retro burn so much, then I would have had a lower peak. And there we go, so it has peaked, in part because we've come down in the atmosphere enough, we've slowed down enough, and we've really lost orbital speed. We're still going, if you poke far, you just look at the math, we're still like hypersonic, they're coming down to supersonic. Still going very fast. But yeah, at this point it becomes less interesting. I'm curious if that, oh yeah, neat. Yeah, you can see it as a function of time or as a function of distance. Very neat. So symmetric in time, more or less it looks like. Yeah, where it's kind of a Gaussian curve. Symmetric around this line. Very neat. All right, so we're coming down to subsonic speeds, and that's I also set this to show the altitude of the craft, specifically from the bottom of the craft, because we need to open a parachute at some point. And it's also set to stage to drop the heat shield as an option. Which reminds me, it'd be nice if we had if the Mercury model was capable of dropping the heat shield, because it apparently did that, had an airbag, and it's gonna wobble crazily because I'm at time warp and aerodynamics, because right now we're at like half the speed of sound, so moving pretty fast. But yeah, this should be the I'm not going to drop the heat shield in this case just because you can start to see details of the water, so we're approaching it. See, I really like that you can see scatter gives us the detail of the water, because then you can actually tell that you're approaching it very fast, and like roughly how far away. You start to get a sense of altitude and distance. Okay, so I should probably pop the parachute. It'll be a drogue chute for a bit, so we're getting some acceleration or deceleration in this case, but not as much as once it actually unfurls completely. There we go, and then it'll just be a little bit until we drop into the water, and we will recover this satellite, which brought us science from a polar orbit. Our very first recovery of a craft, I suppose. Which also possibly could be a mission. Again, I would like if there were a couple more benchmark contracts before something like this. But of course, in the comments or whatever, tell me what you think. All right, and please don't freeze when you hit the water. All right, didn't freeze. It's kind of buoying. You can start to see the effect break down, but there we go. So we'll recover the science from that vessel, and that will be it. So we have successfully recovered. We put up a satellite into a polar orbit. We got a tiny bit of science from it because we don't have the camera yet. But once we have the camera technology, it'll be pretty, relatively simple to add that technology to a craft like this. All right, but beyond that, looking forward, I'll be building the Atlas craft, so it won't be very reliable because it'll be brand new. At this point in history, U.S. also started building the Titan. I'll be discussing a bit of those because it's very interesting, both the Titan 1 and Atlas development cycles, as the U.S. is developing their very first ICBMs. And we'll be using those as sounding rockets to start, and then we'll be combining them with our Able upper stage, which is kind of the first thing in particular in this series I'm quite interested to talk about, is the combination of different lower stages and upper stages over time. And then we'll be developing a new upper stage, the Agena upper stage, to be used with both our Thor and with our Atlas rocket. So I look forward to that, and accomplishing more missions with those stages. So thank you for watching. This is the RP-0 America series. Goodbye.